Are we allowed?
And we are live.
Well, we are live. Obviously, you are with us live on Give the People What They Want, coming to you from People's Dispatch. Zoe and Prashant, nice to see you again. And me, Vijay from Globetrotter. Today is the 30th of April, 2021. I'm not allergic to many things, but I'd like to admit to all of you, our loyal viewers and listeners of Give the People What They Want. We hope this has become your favorite show. Let your friends know about it. I want to admit to you publicly, I'm terribly allergic to penicillin. The story of penicillin, however, is so important. When it was discovered in Oxford in 1928, the government and the university decided not to patent penicillin. Penicillin was available freely. It was mass produced in the United States in the 1940s. Many years ago, when I was a child, I visited Hindustan Antibiotics in Pune, in India, Western India, one of the first public sector drug manufacturers. In 1955, Hindustan Antibiotics began to produce penicillin at mass scale and extended the lives of a very large number of people. Got to remember the story of penicillin. That's what public health should be like. That's what public medicine should be like. And give the people what they want. We tell you about the past, but also the present. Right now, the epicenter of COVID-19, it's back to India. It's back to India. It zigzags. United States, Brazil, India. It's back to India. India, the country that once had a robust public sector, pharmaceutical drug production industry. Prashant, what is the story from the epicenter of the carnage?
Right, Vijay. We've kind of reached a situation where numbers have become a blur right now. I mean, the whole of past year has been about just a flurry of numbers from across the world. And right now, after nearly 2 weeks of continuous horror, for lack of a better word, some of these numbers have become almost difficult to comprehend right now. Today morning, for instance, we saw that the number of cases was, say, somewhere around 386,000, nearly 387,000. We had over 3,500 deaths across the country. And just to sort of put some of this in context, there's another very shocking number which came in the news a few days ago, which was that cremation, of course, a very prominent form of after post-death rites in India, and in one of Delhi's biggest cremation grounds, the daily consumption of wood, which is what is used, has increased from about, say, 6,000 to 8,000 kilos a day to 80,000 to 90,000 kilos a day. And that's just maybe a small snapshot. This is just one cremation ground in Delhi we're talking about. And this is just maybe a small snapshot of the kind of horror that we're witnessing. I mean, last week we talked about this, queues in front of cremation grounds, like we said, queues in front of hospitals, people desperately struggling for oxygen, people dying due to lack of oxygen in the most depressing circumstances, the agony of loved ones who are just trying everything possible just to get maybe admission to a hospital or say an oxygen cylinder at the right time. And all this basically we're looking at a collapse. There's no other word for it. And we're looking at a collapse. Again, we talked about this last week, that was definitely preventable in the sense that the government had planned it out. And we're also looking at a government in denial, because even now various authorities are insisting that there is no real oxygen shortage. It's it's a problem with delivery, etc., which is all great to say, but how do you tell that to people whose loved ones have died for lack of oxygen in the year 2021? And this, I think, the government has been in denial. Like I said, it is there was this incredibly ironic moment today where the Supreme Court of India, the highest court in the land, had to issue instructions that if anybody faced police legal proceedings for complaining or demanding supplies like oxygen, the court would take a stern view of it. So basically what we saw was, in the past few days, reports of people being threatened, reports of actually police action being initiated in one or two cases of when people, said that, we need oxygen or we need supplies, because that constituted rumor mongering. So, and you have the highest court in the land in what is considered the biggest democracy. There's a lot of oldest democracies, a lot of drama about that. But the highest court in the land actually having to say that if this happens, we will take a very stern view of it. And that, I think, explains the kind of, because this has been always been a government, especially under the BJP, a government which has focused purely on perception, managing perceptions, purely on managing impressions rather than facts. And this fact-free model of governance has actually led to a lot of this excessive centralization, no power given to the states, no transparency, just a lot of slogans and rhetoric. We see this in the issue of vaccines as well, where the private companies who are supplying vaccines in India have put different rates for the central government, different rates for the state governments, and different rates for private hospitals. And today, again, the court asked what everyone has been asking: why are there different rates? They say it's people across India who are being vaccinated, so why are there different rates for vaccines? And I think one of the owners of one of these companies made it very clear when he said that the current rates are profitable, but it's not super profitable. And I think so. We see, rampant capitalism, a complete collapse of governance, all the characteristics of the BJP right-wing state. KK Shailaja, the chief minister, the health minister of Kerala, which has been Kerala has been interesting because they're reporting a high number of cases, but the death rates are very, very low because of a very consistent strategy. She made an interesting point today where she said in media that if we were in power, we would have nationalized the health sector. And this is something even that has happened even in a couple of capitalist countries as well. And I think at this point, while reflecting on the horrors as well as the sheer mismanagement, these are slogans that we should take up. These are demands that we should put forward, because this is definitely a site for continuing struggle as well.
It's very important what she said. If we were in government, we would have nationalized the health system. India remains, as you say, in a crisis. Oxygen supplies, beds, ventilators, basic things that shouldn't be difficult to provide for people, simply unavailable. I think, Prashant, that point you made about a prime minister more interested in public relations than on governing, than on the people's needs. That's Narendra Modi. You jump across the world to Colombia, to Ivan Duque, another person much more interested in public relations than on the needs of the people. Colombia, country of 50 million people, almost 3 million people infected with the coronavirus, with COVID-19, the disease. Third day of their general strike on now. Zoe, what's happening in Bogota? What's happening in Medellin? What's happening in that beautiful country of Colombia?
Well, it's a really revolutionary and exciting moment in Colombia. There's been protests in cities and towns across the country. So not only Medellin and Bogota and the other big cities, but, small towns, small communities across the country. It's been really impressive. People are on the streets and demanding that the national government withdraw the very controversial tax reform plan, which essentially would have the VAT tax applied onto basic food items and increase prices across the board. One of the most emblematic examples is that the price of eggs, which is a daily good that people use, across the country, would greatly increase. And essentially the government what's ironic and, of course, very depressing is that the government has called this the Solidarity Tax Reform Plan. And as, of course, people from the left, this tax reform is nothing about solidarity. It's about charging the working class, making the working class pay for the coronavirus pandemic and the economic crisis that's been brewing in a country like Colombia, where the health sector has been privatized, where there's no semblance of a public sector, where neoliberalism has ravaged the country. But, beyond people protesting against this tax reform plan, which, honestly, I encourage, check out the People's Dispatch video on the strike. It's incredible to see the amount of people on the streets, really, really inspiring at this moment. But people are also protesting, the persistent and constant state violence against communities. We've talked about it constantly on People's Dispatch and on this show, Give the People What They Want, about the levels of violence faced by organized communities, faced by social leaders, faced by human rights defenders, former combatants of the FARC. And, people are not having it with this state violence. And, the power that the figure of Uribe held in Colombia is just decaying, deteriorating. People are no longer afraid of the far right. And they're seeing that their unity across sectors, across class lines, across, everything is more powerful than the far right, which has only insisted in imposing these, anti-people measures. And it has so far said that they will not withdraw this plan. There's a really recent update that said that they potentially would discuss having a new tax reform and discussing it with other parties. But this remains to be seen. So far, they've responded with violence to the protests. At least 4 people have been killed in the police repression. Last night, the police were on the streets in cities like Pasto, which is a town near the Ecuadorian border, and they're just open firing at protesters, invading, residential communities, picking up protesters, beating them up. I mean, some of the images are really, really horrifying. But the people remain resilient. I think in the levels of violence faced by the communities in Colombia means that they will not be deterred by this repression, and they will continue on the streets. There's a really beautiful image of the mother of Dylan Cruz, who was a young student who was killed in the general strike in 2019 against neoliberal reforms, who has been out there on the streets holding up the photo of her son and continuing to protest. So I think these are really inspiring images.
And it's not likely to come to a close. It looks like Mr. Ivan Duque will not back off from this bill, and it's unlikely. Today's the 3rd day. Reminds us, of course, that the farmers' protest in India is still ongoing. In fact, the deadlock, as it were, between a cruel government that in the middle of all this, not only inconsiderate about COVID-19, but also the demands of the farmers. Another deadlock in Colombia, mirror image countries. Today is the day, 30th of April, 2021, 46 years ago, the Vietnamese people liberated Saigon, now Ho Chi Minh City. The United States government withdrew. A great defeat for the United States in Vietnam. Vietnamese people had declared their independence in 1945. They had to fight for 30 years to claim the right to their sovereignty. Even then, a country just destroyed by chemical weapons, Agent Orange, napalm, and so on. From tomorrow, friends, the United States is going to begin its withdrawal from Afghanistan. From tomorrow, the withdrawal begins, and it's to end by the 11th of September 2021. The United States government is going to begin its withdrawal from Afghanistan. I caution you with the word withdrawal. 2,500 US troops are going to leave Afghanistan. Thousands of US personnel will remain. This includes the ghost soldiers of the CIA, of the Central Intelligence Agency. This includes mercenaries. It includes so-called advisors, contractors, trainers, and so on. The numbers are extraordinary, between 1,000 and 16,000. I mean, I'm not joking. And this is from that great, bastion of news, the New York Times. A few days ago, Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State of the United States, made a statement that he fears Afghanistan will enter into a civil war. 10 days before Mr. Blinken said this, Mir Rahman Rahmani, the Speaker of the Afghan Parliament, said the same thing. In fact, both Mr. Blinken and Mr. Rahmani are wrong. Afghanistan has been in a civil war, civil conflict since at least 1979. Very long, painful, and difficult conflict going on there. Mr. Blinken and Mr. Rahmani both said that there's a chance that the Taliban must return. In fact, Mr. Blinken made the extraordinary comment that the Taliban now is not as harsh as it used to be in 2001. 20 years of war, thousands and thousands of people dead, enormous amount of social wealth wasted. And at the end of the day, you're going to have a softer Taliban. Is that what war is to bring you? Not a victory, but a softness. The United States defeated in its war aims in Afghanistan, but not actually withdrawing, because the real purpose that the US will continue to remain in Afghanistan is to destabilize or break down the relations that Russia has with the old Central Asian countries which were part of the USSR: Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan. These countries had close relationships with Russia, continued to. United States was very keen in the north-south axis, tearing these countries up, bringing them closer to the United States through Afghanistan down to India. That plan has not really developed very far. It was what was enunciated by Hillary Clinton in 2011. They also want to try to destabilize the Chinese ambitions of the Belt and Road Initiative. Afghanistan, a key place in that. Instability in Afghanistan looks to be the actual war aim. So it's not clear if there actually is a peace plan for Afghanistan. Because there's a withdrawal of formal troops doesn't mean that peace is going to come to Afghanistan. I want you to remember, when the Soviet troops pulled out, between the Soviet pullout in around 1992 till 9/11, more people were killed in that period than during the war when the Soviets had been in Afghanistan from 1979 to 1991-92. I want you to digest that. And more people yet had been killed in the early years of the US bombardment in Afghanistan. A zone of instability, it benefits certain countries, doesn't benefit others. A lot of the operations going on in Uzbekistan, in Xinjiang, and so on, part of this ugly mess. Still, it's good that the United States is withdrawing the 2,500 troops from Afghanistan, but it's not a withdrawal, and it's certainly not peace. You're listening to Give the People What They Want, coming to you from People's Dispatch with Zoe and Prashant and me, Vijay, from Globetrotter. We come every week on Friday. We love being with you. We love hearing from you. Tell us what you think about the shades of black, or if you're Prashant, gray, that we wear. Tell us about whether you think we're covering the stories effectively. Tell us if we're not covering some stories. We're very keen not to miss things that are happening around the world, and which is why Prashant has spent a lot of time looking at events in Chad, where it looks like there is a coup with the role of the French front and center, a coup d'etat in Chad, a coup d'etat, and it's not on the front pages of newspapers around the world. Prashant, what is happening in Chad?
Right, Vijay. Like you said, it's a development of great significance for multiple reasons. We'll come to, of course. The basic facts are pretty simple. Idris Deby, the president of Chad from 1990 onwards, he was killed in a battle with rebels a few days ago, and on April 20th. And so immediately after that, we saw that Deby himself had come to power with the backing of the French, of course. He'd stayed in power with the backing of the French despite running a very, very repressive regime. And the key point behind all this was that Chad is of vital strategic importance to France, especially its Operation Barkhane, and Chad's security forces are an integral part of that operation. So Chad being say the key center of French geopolitical interest, they were very determined that nothing should disrupt this regime. And immediately after the death of Idris Deby, his son Mohammed Deby, who's 37 years old, was proclaimed the leader of a new military junta. And this was, there was complete outrage in Chad over this, because just recently Idris Deby had won elections for the 6th term, and he had been elected the president. Before the elections, there had been again repression. Opposition activists were targeted, many were arrested, their houses were attacked. So this was the situation in which the country was going through. And you have a repressive crackdown before the election. You have an election which has its own legal complications, which we can't get into today. And the president dies in battle, and now we have a military junta coming to power. Now, many have raised comparisons to country like Sudan, which is again which is the neighborhood, because the military junta has appointed a prime minister. So there's some kind of seeming civilian cover to the situation as it is. But what happened, in fact, was that the constitution was suspended because it mandates that if the president dies, the speaker should be in charge and elections should be held. So the constitution was dissolved, the parliament was dissolved, and say basically the military has risen to power again. Now protests have been taking place. On April 27th. There was a round of protests, and in the, anywhere close to about 9 to 10 people were killed by police forces, and this is likely to continue because a lot of civil society forces are are really up in arms, for lack of a better word. And the interesting thing, of course, here being that the rebels whom the government was facing, they were a product of the war in Libya. The FACT group was actually allied to Khalifa Haftar's Libyan National Army in Libya. And once the war in Libya kind of subsided, this group attacked the government. So what we see in a country like Chad, and what we see, in fact, the whole of North Africa, is basically the entire region being used as a playground for the interests of a lot of these imperialist powers. We know France is playing a very dirty game here. We know that Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and the UAE, they're playing their own games in this region as well. And what we see is that the aspirations of the people of Chad basically being consistently destroyed, consistently repressed in the name of this geopolitical strategic game that is taking place. And the difference here, of course, this time being that people are rising up in protest. They do face a great deal of danger because, as we've seen, the French government has been very vehement in its backing of the new overlords of Chad, the military junta. In fact, Emmanuel Macron was present at the funeral, and the government has extended its support, saying that stability is important. But what we're seeing here clearly is the byproduct of decades of these kind of say games that are being played by colonial powers. So very closely developing situation, because there's so many players here right now, and we have to see what happens in the coming weeks.
You see, what is happening in Chad, where there is a pressure on the politics of a country, its sovereignty is simply not being allowed, is what we've seen across the Sahel, whether it's in Libya, as you rightly pointed to the connections, or indeed in Mali, Mauritania, Niger. I mean, these countries are seeing their sovereignty compromised principally by France and the United States. Should not go without comment that the French and the United States have basically a string of military bases in that region. France has the G5 Sahel, 5 of the countries linked together. Appalling condition. Our eyes were briefly, not for very long, on Turkey, briefly because in the Court of Appeals, there was a trial for the People's Democratic Party, the HDP. 108, I'm just checking the number, 108 politicians of the People's Democratic Party up against an accusation that they instigated riots in Kobane in 2014, in which about 38 people died. All kinds of experts have looked at the evidence of this. They found no evidence that the HDP, its politicians, participated in the instigation. By the way, this is very similar to a case in India, in Western India, where people like Sudha Bardwaj, sitting in prison, most likely has COVID. Anand Teltumde and others most likely have COVID. That's at least Sudha Bardwaj, accused of instigating an event in Western India which they had nothing to do. There's no evidence. Same with the Kobane case. This Kobane trial, 108 people, including the leaders of the party, brought into the court, and then a 3,530-page indictment was read out. Imagine this. What kind of justice will you get when essentially this is a logjam? No real defense could be mounted. Questions were raised of bias. The defendant wanted to raise a question of bias, of the judge. That was just not allowed. And then the case was put off until the 3rd of May. Let's see what happens. But the issue that I want to put forward for people is this is what's happening around the world to democracy. We saw this in Brazil when Dilma Rousseff was impeached in a very strange legislative coup. We saw this with Lula, a judicial coup. The term of art for all this, friends, is lawfare. It's what happened to Rafael Correa trying to run in the election in Ecuador this year. The term of art is lawfare. Lawfare is being used against the HDP, which is a open-minded political force, not only of the Kurdish emancipation movement, but also of the left in Turkey. It's a much broader thing than a Kurdish party. It's wrong to call it a Kurdish movement. It's much broader than that. The HDP, one of the main opposition parties to Mr. Erdogan, he, rather than fight them politically, is trying to delegitimize them, ban them. This is lawfare, friends. This is how democracy essentially is being cut back. This is the kind of thing we at Give the People What They Want are very much seized of, and we try to bring this to your attention every single week. Last week we brought to your attention how the Peruvian foreign ministry said foreigners should not pay attention to Peru's elections. Foreigners should not pay, and they must not have any opinions either. We said last week we have lots of opinions. We also believe the HDP, even though none of us are Turkish, none of us have a right to interfere in Turkey's politics, but we believe it's a political party. We report them as a political party. We will report them as a political party, even if they end up being banned. We will report them as a political party. It's part of the politics of the country. We're at the threshold of one of the most important days of the year, and that's May Day, the 1st of May. May Day, it's a history that starts in Chicago, Illinois. It's a history of workers. Zoe, what are you planning to do on May Day 2021?
Well, this May Day is, of course, very different from other May Days, as May Day was last year. I think last year we were just starting to hunker down after a couple months of lockdown. Okay, yeah, looks like we won't be able to march. I think similar vision towards this year. Of course, some of the most historic moments of the workers' movement across the world, happen on May Day, of course, in Cuba. That incredible hundreds of thousands of people on the main avenues. Sadly, one of the things that, the COVID-19 pandemic has taken from us and working class movements is our ability to mass mobilize. That being said, there's still a lot of things to look forward to, because while we can't gather in these ways, the struggle of the movements continues. Our struggle for emancipation and our struggle for rights continues across the world. I personally will be going to the People's Forum, and there's going to be, a book fair. They have some amazing new bookstore that was opened. Going to be, paying attention to the actions that are happening across the world. Of course, again, most people in most countries will not be able to go out in the traditional format. But also, I think it's a day to reflect, and take stock. We're in, of course, for the last couple of years, the crisis of capitalism, the crisis of neoliberal capitalism has been deepening. We see workers organized in places that historically they've never been organized. We published a great article this week by Tarwa Zuniga about delivery drivers, and about, people who are intentionally divided in their workplace, intentionally individualized by their employers, not given any rights, but overcome that in our organizing and are fighting for their rights, are fighting for collective recognition. And these are the stories that need to be inspiring us. I wanted to hear from both of you before we end up today. Where are we drawing this inspiration from?
Prashant, what's going on for you with, I'm sure it's got to be the farmers' revolt. What else?
Absolutely, yeah. I think that probably the highlight of this year has definitely been that, because the possibility of workers and farmers, not just the possibility, the reality of workers and farmers agitating together, striking together, pushing back against the Modi government's policies together, has been one of the key stories of the year in India. And I think, like I said, this unity is something that is not just a product of this struggle, but of multiple struggles over the past few years. this unity is something that a lot of the media does not cover, because there is a tendency in India, perhaps maybe in other parts of the world too, to do focus on the farmers' struggle while ignoring, the movements by the workers. Probably because workers' movements are, in that sense, a bit more difficult to explain to their audiences, whereas you can always, to some extent, romanticize the farmers' movements. But the farmers and workers are very clear about it, that there's a joint struggle and it has to keep continuing. So definitely the highlight of the year. And as for tomorrow, I think my answer to what I'll be doing is pretty much what yours is going to be as well, Vijay. So I'll leave that to you.
Well, yes, exactly. From 4 p.m. Indian Standard Time, Prashant and I will be watching Pranjal of News Click open the innings at Leftward Books and Mayday Bookstore, interviewing Sainath. I'll be interviewing Satyajit Rath, Prabir Purkayastha, and Tejal about the vaccine situation. The day will go on, and we'll have a roundtable panel with farmer leaders who are in the thick of this movement. Also, songs from the farmer agitation. Join us on May Day at Mayday Bookstore and Leftward Books. It's, of course, going to be broadcast on the various channels that you can go out there, because you're smarter than us, and find out where this is happening. The day starts very special beginning. Pranjal talking to Sainath about the farmers' agitation. It ends with "to be announced," which is always mesmerizing. To be announced is one of the great acts of the 21st century. You've been watching Give the People What They Want with Prashant and Zoe from People's Dispatch. That's peoplesdispatch.org. Go read it every day. Terrific stories each and every day, including terrific videos. Our producer Surangya is a major star there, because she produces and stars with her voice in a number of videos. If you don't know what she looks like, because she hides during the show, go listen to her voice on some of the videos. I'm Vijay from Globetrotter. We're at globetrotter.media. We don't really have a website. We're a syndication service. Figure it out. We'll join you again next Friday. This is your favorite show. We know that. We come to you every Friday with a little taste of what's happening around the world, a little touch of the dialectic. Tell your friends about Give the People What They Want. Join us again next Friday. Thanks a lot, and see you then.
And happy International Workers' Day.